wanted to touch on an article that I did last week for the Post Millennial, where I'm doing most of my writing these days, and it's really a great publication because it's cross border, so you can talk about American or Canadian issues, and Americans are reading about Canadian news, Canadians are reading about American news, and I think that's good because we're certainly in the same news cycle, and we cannot isolate in terms. But I wrote an article last week about Trudeau's war on farmers, and
Yeah.
when I wrote that headline, I thought about you because the last time we spoke, when I was doing an interview for the Western Standard, you called what Trudeau was doing to farmers a war on farmers. And specifically, there's been an announcement recently about this 30% reduction in fertilizer. And I just want to look at this slide here because it talks about reduction of fertilizer use by 2030 to 2020 levels. Now, previously, I'll get that in a minute. But previously, the Ag Department has talked about fertilizer emissions, not use. And this doesn't appear to be a typo or an error because people have been asking the minister about this. And this does seem to be a accurate depiction of what the government wants. Do you think the government's actually expecting farmers to reduce fertilizer use by 30% by 2030?
Well, yes, I do, because the first way they were measuring it didn't give them anything they could cheer about. Farmers are already stewards of the environment and their land. Of course, the 4 R's come into play: the right type, the right place, the right time, and the right amount. And that gives farmers the best results. Fertilizer is an expensive commodity. You just don't go out there and spread on hundreds of pounds that you don't need. A lot of times you'll wait till the crop is up, and then you'll top dress at certain areas to give that little zing to it. But it's now about micronutrients too, the copper and manganese and sulfurs and so on that drive the protein level up, the sulfur. And that's what farmers are gravitating towards. So for some reason, this government has got agriculture under its lens, not unlike what they've done to other resource sectors. And if they would stop and realize that this is all part of a supply chain, that when they make these types of changes to the base, the agricultural growers themselves, it affects the full supply chain, which ends up on the grocery store shelves. And that's where our high prices are coming from in these arcane regulations that they plan on bringing in to hit a target that doesn't matter. You know, they've got a solution looking for a problem.
Well, it concerns me when they went from emissions to use. But what really concerns me is the idea that they keep saying this is going to be voluntary participation by farmers. I find that difficult to believe
Yeah.
because nothing during our COVID experience, during that whole pandemic, nothing was voluntary. It was mandated. They forced us to wear masks. They forced us to take the vaccine if we wanted to work or travel or to live like ordinary human beings. And the the environment and climate change minister, Stephen Guilbeault, who seems to be really in control of the ag department these days,
Mm-hmm.
he has gone around saying if we want to divorce ourselves from fossil fuels, I'm just going to turn off the pumps. I'm going to shut off the natural gas. I'm going to turn off the electricity. And I don't care if people are freezing or can't read or can't do anything normal because it's all about fulfilling the agenda of climate change.
Yeah.
And do you really believe for a minute the farmers are going to be, this is going to be a voluntary program for farmers?
No, not at all. I think the same as we had a voluntary gun registry, after a while it became mandatory under these liberals. And that's what they do best. I mean, Trudeau with his little buddy Jagmeet Singh, who's also a closet anti-agricultural, from downtown Toronto. He doesn't understand where the bread on his table comes from and how it gets there and why it costs what it costs. And that's the problem with these guys. They're disconnected from any type of rural roots. They've had a couple of ag ministers. Lawrence McCauley actually did run a dairy at one point. Not a large one by any stretch, but he actually was hands on. But that's some 40 years ago already. And Bibeau, who came in, sat on the board of something that might have been or could have been ag related, and we all saw what a disaster she was. Now Lawrence is getting a do-over, coming back in for his second stint at this, and he's the one whose loose lips started talking about a mandatory 30% reduction in fertilizer use. I think he got out ahead of the comms team led by Katie Telford, of course, and he's actually spilled the beans, quite literally. And farmers are starting to be concerned. And what that does as a trading nation, it sends those ripples out across the world that Canadian agriculture is going to shrink, not grow, to feed that hungry world.
Well, they've already placed a 30% tariff on fertilizer from Russia, which is a large part of what farmers were getting their fertilizer from. So a 30% reduction. This, to me, smells of something that is just disastrous, catastrophic for farmers. Could this not only lead to Canada not being an exporter nation of foodstuffs, but in fact, could it lead to some degree of famine in this country?
Well, certainly. I mean, we eat on average about 50% of what we produce, some commodities higher than others, but then we export the balance. And if there isn't that amount to export, of course, we'll look after our own first. They'll come in with programs that say you have to sell cheap to the domestic supply, that two-price system we used to have under the wheat board. But at the end of the day, I mean, it still comes down to our credibility and our capacity to be a global player. And we're losing that face out there on the world stage. Every time I see Trudeau or Joly or Freeland or anybody go outside of Canada, I just shake in my boots, because every time they do, there's a major faux pas created.
Hi, this is David Crayden from Crayden's Right and Stand on Guard. Join the resistance. Resolve to resist. Become a member of this station. I've been practicing journalism in one form or another for over 30 years. I've worked in print, radio, and television for a lot of prestigious publications and media outlets. I was an Armed Forces Public Affairs officer. I worked on Parliament Hill. I know how Ottawa works, and I know how corrupt federal government can be. But you can play a part in opposing Justin Trudeau's government and Justin Trudeau's plans for Canada. You can become a part of the KRAYDEN'S Right resistance. Now, I urge you today, please support this station in any way you can. Ring that bell, subscribe, because that ensures you're at least going to continue to be able to watch these episodes. You'll beat the algorithm. But more importantly, I need your financial support. I hate to ask, but that's what I'm doing. I made a decision to pursue independent media because I believed it was the best possible route for me to take as a journalist and as a concerned citizen of Canada. So you can become a part of that. And at only $5, you can become a part of that on YouTube, on Substack, and with Buy Me a Coffee, a one-time donation. But I need your support. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. If you've already done that, if you're already supporting the station, thank you. But if you haven't, make that decision today